She was forced to play the piano as a joke, but when her fingers touched the keys, the whole world was left speechless. Lolita was a quiet woman. She didn't speak much, and she never tried to stand out. She lived alone in a small rented room at the edge of the town. Her world was very small, just a few people she worked for, a small vegetable shop near her house, and a tiny temple she visited on Sundays. She wore the same type of plain sari every day, always clean but never fancy. People barely noticed her, and that was how she liked it. She worked as a cook and cleaner in the homes of rich people. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, packed her tiffin, tied her gray hair into a bun, and walked to the first house on her list. She cleaned floors, made chapatis, chopped vegetables, and washed dishes. Most people didn't talk to her much. Some gave her instructions in short, rude sentences. A few treated her kindly, but still. She was always seen as a servant, someone who should do her work quietly and not get in the way. But there was something no one knew about Lolita. She had a secret, something buried deep inside her, like an old treasure locked in a box and forgotten. Even she had almost forgotten it. Years had passed since she had thought about music. In her youth, she had learned to play the piano. Her father had been a piano teacher, and she had grown up around music. Back then, the sound of the piano was her world. She used to sit for hours, her fingers moving smoothly over the keys, lost in melodies. Her father used to say, "Lolita, you don't just play music. You feel it." But that was a long time ago. After she got married, her life changed. Her husband didn't like music. He said it was a waste of time, something for rich people. He wanted her to focus only on household work. Slowly, she stopped playing. After he passed away, she had to raise her daughter alone. There was no money, no time, and no space for music in her life anymore. Survival came first. Now, she was almost 60. Her daughter was grown and married. Lolita still worked because she didn't want to depend on anyone. She liked being independent, even if life was hard. One sunny afternoon, her employer, Mrs. Chatterjee, asked her to help with a big party. It was going to be held at a rich friend's house, someone from the upper class. "It's a fancy gathering," Mrs. Chatterjee said. "They need extra help. You'll just serve drinks and snacks. You'll behave properly and don't speak unless spoken to." Lolita nodded silently, as she always did. On the day of the party, Lolita wore a clean white sari with a light blue border. She oiled her hair and pinned it neatly. She took a bus to the big bungalow, feeling a little nervous. When she arrived, she was amazed by how grand everything looked. Golden lights, marble floors, expensive paintings, and large vases filled with fresh flowers. She had worked in rich homes before, but this place was something else. It looked like a palace inside. The party was already in full swing. Well-dressed guests sipped wine and chatted in English. Waiters in black suits moved around with trays of snacks. Soft classical music played in the background. Lolita quietly took a tray of tea and began serving people. No one paid attention to her, except when they needed something. Then she noticed the piano. It stood in the corner of the hall, shining under the light. A grand piano, black, beautiful, and elegant. Its surface was polished like a mirror. Her eyes stopped on it for a moment. She hadn't seen a real piano up close in years. Something stirred inside her, a strange mix of joy and pain. She looked at it as if seeing an old friend after many years. Her hands carrying the tray trembled just a little. She didn't realize that someone was watching her, a young man, probably in his late 20s, with gelled hair and an expensive suit, had noticed her gaze. He smirked and whispered something to his friends. They looked at Lolita and chuckled. "Hey, Auntie," he suddenly called out loudly. "Do you know how to play that?" Lolita turned, surprised. She wasn't used to being addressed like that at these parties. A few heads turned in her direction. The young man continued, "You were staring at the piano. Do you know how to play it? Come on, show us something." His tone was not friendly. It was full of mockery. It's the way people sometimes tease someone. They think is harmless for fun, for laughs. The guests around them laughed. Someone said, "Yes, let's see what talent the staff has today." Lolita froze. She didn't know what to say. She gave a small, nervous smile and shook her head. "Oh, come on," the young man said. "Don't be shy. Just a little music. We won't judge." He was clearly enjoying the attention. The crowd around him was also smiling, expecting a joke. Someone even clapped softly, saying, "Let her try, let her try." The host of the party, a woman in a glittering silk sari, looked amused and said, "Why not? It could be interesting." Lolita stood there, unsure what to do. Every eye was now on her. Part of her wanted to run away, to go back to the kitchen and hide. But another part, the small voice she hadn't heard in years, whispered, "Go ahead, just touch the keys, just once." Slowly, with trembling hands, she walked toward the piano. There was complete silence now. Even the background music had stopped. People leaned in, expecting something funny. Some thought she might bang random notes, or play something silly. No one expected anything serious. Lolita sat down on the piano bench. Her hands hovered over the keys. She took a deep breath. For a moment, her mind was blank. Then as her fingers touched the keys, muscle memory kicked in. She began to play. The sound that came out was soft and smooth, like a whisper of wind through trees. Then it grew, turning into a melody that filled the room with emotion. Wasn't a modern tune or a flashy piece. It was something old, something full of feeling, the kind of music that told a story without using words. The crowd was stunned. The smirk disappeared from the young man's face. People looked at each other in disbelief. Some had their mouths slightly open. Others stood frozen. No one moved. Lolita kept playing, her fingers moving with grace and power. She wasn't even thinking anymore. She was somewhere else in another time, in another place, with her father beside her, with the window open and the morning sun on her hands. She was no longer a servant in a rich man's house. She was a pianist again. Tears welled up in the eyes of an older woman standing near. The back. A young girl put down her phone and just listened, completely silent. The piece ended with a soft, gentle note, and then silence again. For a few seconds, no one clapped. They were still trying to understand what had just happened. Then someone started applauding. Slowly, more people joined in. Soon, the room was filled with the sound of claps, not mocking. It's not polite, but full of respect and surprise. Lolita stood up slowly, her face calm. Someone asked, "Where did you learn that?" She replied quietly, "My father taught me. I used to play when I was younger." That was all she said. The young man who had mocked her looked down, embarrassed. He didn't say anything more. The host came forward and gently touched Lolita's arm. "That was beautiful," she said. Honestly, Lolita nodded and went back to the kitchen without another word. But that moment stayed in everyone's mind. The simple woman in a plain sari had just reminded a room full of people that true talent doesn't care about clothes, money, or social status. Just needs a moment and a piano. That night when Lolita returned home, she sat on her bed and looked at her hands. For the first time in years, she smiled to herself. Not because people clapped, not because she had surprised them. She smiled because she had played again, and deep inside her, something that had been asleep for many years had just begun to wake up. After that unforgettable evening at the Grand Bungalow, things returned to normal for most people. The guests went back to their lives, and the lights of the party were switched off. But for Lolita, something had changed deep inside. She still took the same early morning bus, still chopped vegetables and scrubbed the floors, but her heart felt slightly lighter. Something that had been asleep inside her had opened its eyes again, blinking softly like the sun rising after a long night. But she didn't talk about it. Not to anyone. Not even to her daughter, who called her once a week from another city. Lolita believed some things were better kept in the heart. And yet, without her realizing it, her small world was about to change because of what happened. At that party, a few days after the event, Mrs. Chatterjee, her employer, came home with a puzzled expression. She looked at Lolita in a strange way. Not rude, but not quite friendly either, as if she was trying to understand her better. While Lolita served tea, Mrs. Chatterjee said casually, "You know, people are still talking about you, my friends. Son, the one who asked you to play well. He told me the whole story. They said you played like a professional." Lolita just smiled and poured the tea. She didn't say a word. Mrs. Chatterjee continued, I didn't know you could play. The piano. Why didn't you ever mention it? Lolita replied softly. There was no reason to mention it, madam. It was a long time ago. That was true. She had buried that part of her life long ago. Music had no place in the world she lived in now. A world full of deadlines, groceries, cleaning, and serving. She had convinced herself long ago that it was just a childish dream, a luxury for people who had the time and money for it. She wasn't one of them, but the world had seen a glimpse of her. And now it was curious. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the dining table, a young woman arrived at the house. She introduced herself as Ananya, a reporter from a local lifestyle magazine. We're writing a piece on hidden talents, she said brightly. And we heard about you, the maid who plays the piano like a master. Everyone's talking about that night. Lolita was startled. She looked at Mrs. Chatterjee, who smiled and said, I gave her your name. You should talk to her. It's a lovely story. Lolita didn't like the attention. She had lived most of her life in the background. Being noticed made her uncomfortable. But the reporter was kind and polite. She didn't make fun of Lolita or treat her like a joke, so Lolita agreed to speak to her. They sat in the small garden outside the bungalow. The young woman asked questions gently about Lolita's childhood. Her father, how she learned the piano, and what had happened after marriage. Lolita answered in short, simple sentences. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just told the truth, like reading lines from a very old book. A week later, the article came out with the title, The Hidden Melody of a Housemaid. There was a small picture of Lolita wearing her plain sari and sitting at the grand piano. Story touched many hearts. People began sharing it online. It reached places Lolita had never heard of. Some readers left comments saying they cried after reading it. Others wanted to know where she was now and if she still played. For Lolita, it was all a little too much. She didn't have a phone with internet. One of the young servants at another house showed her the article on his phone and read the comments aloud. Lolita listened silently. She didn't know how to react. She was glad people liked the music, but she didn't understand why it mattered now. She was just a cook after all, and cooks didn't give concerts. But the story refused to go away. One morning, she received a letter from a music school in the city. They had read about her and wanted her to visit them. The principal, an elderly man who had taught music for 40 years, was deeply moved by her story. You are an example of real talent, the letter said. We would be honored if you could visit and maybe talk to our students. Lolita didn't know what to do. She had never been to a music school, and she had not stood in front of a class since her own school days. The idea of going there scared her. What would she say? Who would want to learn from someone like her? She thought about it for days. Then she folded the letter and kept it in a drawer. She would decide later. Meanwhile, something else happened. The same rich family that had hosted the party called Mrs. Chatterjee. They wanted Lolita to come again, not to work, but to play. The host said she wanted to organize a small musical evening at her house. Nothing grand, just a few friends and family members. She had even arranged for a piano tuner to come and make sure the instrument was ready. Lolita refused politely. She didn't want to be entertainment. That night, she had played because something in her heart had broken open. But she didn't want to become a performer for people who once laughed at her. She wasn't angry, just tired. She didn't want to be part of a show. When Mrs. Chatterjee told the host that Lolita had declined, the woman was surprised. She doesn't want money? We were going to pay her. Oh, Mrs. Chatterjee said, she's not interested. And that was the end of that. But not everyone wanted her for entertainment. A few days later, a woman came to her while she was buying vegetables. She was in her 40s, wearing a simple cotton kurta. Are you Lolita? Shh, I asked kindly. I read your story. Have a small daughter who wants to learn the piano. I can't afford lessons from expensive teachers. Would you teach her? Lolita hesitated. She had never taught music before. But the woman's eyes reminded her of her own when she was younger, full of quiet hope. She said she would think about it. That night, Lolita sat on her bed and looked at her hands again. They were rough now from years of cleaning and chopping. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the keys beneath her fingers. She could still hear the music. The next week, she started teaching the girl. They met every Sunday at the woman's house. The family didn't have a piano, only a small keyboard. But Lolita didn't mind. She taught the girl how to sit straight, how to listen before playing, and how to feel the notes, not just press them. The girl's name was Mira, and she was only 9 years old. She was shy at first, but slowly she began to open up. Her fingers were small and unsure, but her heart was full of excitement. Lolita found herself smiling more often. Other families heard about the lessons and started asking her to. She didn't charge much, just enough to cover her bus fare and lunch, but more than the money, she liked how it felt. Well, she was no longer invisible. She was helping children find the music that had once saved her, and still people remembered. That night at the party, the young man who had mocked her sent a message through Mrs. Chatterjee. He wanted to apologize. He had told his mother that he felt ashamed of how he behaved. He said, "Please tell her I'm sorry, I didn't know. She is incredible." Lolita didn't feel angry toward him anymore. She just said he was young, it's all right. Inside her, something had shifted forever. That night had opened a door that could never be closed again. For years she had believed that her talent had no place in this world, that it was useless in the face of poverty and responsibility. But now she knew something else. Talent doesn't go away. It waits in silence, through heartbreak, through loneliness, through years of dust and disappointment. And sometimes it needs only one moment, even a cruel one, to rise again. Lolita hadn't asked for that moment. She hadn't wanted to perform. But when they pushed her to the piano to mock her, they gave her the greatest gift they could have, a chance to remember who she really was. And now, she was no longer just a servant. She was a teacher, a musician, a woman who had found her. Way back to herself, she didn't wear fancy clothes or speak English fluently. She still made roadies and cleaned kitchens. But she walked with a quiet pride, the kind that comes from knowing your own worth. She hadn't planned any of it. All she did was sit down and play, and that one act had changed everything. Lolita's days slowly started changing. She still woke up before sunrise, tied her hair back tightly, wrapped her sari around her tired body, and left home with her jola bag swinging from her shoulder. She still washed dishes, swept floors, folded laundry, and cleaned windows. But inside, something had begun to glow quietly, like a tiny lamp in a dark room. It wasn't burning bright yet, but it was alive. More and more people were now talking about her story. Some called her the piano maid. Others called her music Wally Bye. At first, Lolita found the name strange, but she didn't mind. The name didn't matter. What mattered was what it brought her children with dreams, women with questions, and people who had forgotten their own talents. Every Sunday, she continued teaching Mira, the little girl who had become her first student. Mira was shy, but eager. Her fingers often hit the wrong keys, and sometimes she got frustrated and pouted. But Lolita was patient. She had learned patience not from any book, but from years of surviving life, knew how long it took for something good to grow. After a few weeks, another child joined the class, then another. Soon, 5 students would sit in the small front room of Mira's house, one keyboard between them, waiting for their turn. They didn't have a big piano, but they had curiosity. Lolita made do with what she had. She wrote notes in a notebook, cut cardboard into shapes of piano keys, and made them practice with their fingers in the air before touching the instrument. She would say softly, "First feel it in your heart, then let your hands follow." These children didn't know her story. They only knew her as Dee, the kind lady who taught them music. That was enough for her. Meanwhile, the music school that had sent her a letter contacted her again. This time, the principal came personally to meet her. He was an elderly man with white hair and thin glasses. He arrived at the house where she worked, carrying a bag with books and a warm smile on his face. He introduced himself as Professor Neek. Mrs. Chatterjee, though surprised, welcomed him in and called Lolita. Lolita came out, her hands covered in flour from rolling chapitas. She wiped them quickly and greeted him with folded hands. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the man said kindly, "but I had to meet you in person. Your story touched me deeply. I've been teaching music for 40 years, and I know when I see real talent. Lolita felt shy. She didn't know what to say. I'd like to invite you to our school, he continued. Not just as a guest, but as someone who could inspire our students. Many of them come from rich families, have expensive instruments, and yet they don't feel the music the way you do. Lolita looked down. Sir, I'm not a teacher. I never learned music from a big school. I only learned from my father. And that, he said with a smile, makes it even more valuable. After thinking for a few days, she finally agreed that Sunday, instead of going to Mira's house, she went to the music school. It was located in a peaceful lane, surrounded by trees. The building was painted white, with large windows and posters of famous musicians on the walls. Children walked around with sheet music and instruments in their hands. Lolita stood at the gate for a moment, nervous. She felt out of place in her simple cotton sari. But when she entered, the guard greeted her politely. A young student guided her to the main hall, where around 50 students sat waiting. A grand piano stood in the corner, polished and shining. Professor Nake introduced her. This is Lolita Didi, he said. She may not look like your usual teacher, but today you will hear something that doesn't come from textbooks. The students looked at her with curious eyes. Some looked surprised, some respectful, and some unsure. Lolita sat at the piano. Her hands trembled slightly. It had been many years since she had played in front of such a group, especially in a formal place like this. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers touch the keys. She didn't play a famous piece. She played something her father had taught her long ago, a soft, flowing tune with gentle rises and falls. The music filled the hall, melting all awkwardness and doubts. Every note felt like a story of struggle, silence, hope, and survival. When she finished, the room remained silent for a few seconds. Then came a soft clap, then louder. Then everyone stood up and clapped. Lolita stood up, smiled, and folded her hands. After that day, school offered her a part-time job. Not as a formal teacher, but as a mentor, someone who could guide students with heart and honesty. Lolita was unsure again, but Professor Nake said, even 1 hour a week from you will make a difference. She agreed. Every Saturday morning. She went to the music school for 1 hour. She didn't teach notes or theory, she taught feeling. She told students to play with closed eyes, to remember their favorite memory, to feel the wind, the rain, or the smell of their mother's cooking, and to let that memory guide their hands. Some students were confused at first, but slowly they understood. She became known as Soul Didi among the students. A girl named Prisha said, I played the same song 10 times before. But when Didi told me to think of my grandmother's smile while playing, the music changed. Lolita still worked as a maid in 2 houses. She didn't quit. She still made rotis, washed bathrooms, and carried vegetables in cloth bags. But now, she also carried a new identity inside her, one of strength, art, and pride. And then something happened that made everything even bigger. A famous musician, Ravi Solanki, came across the magazine article online. He was a judge on a popular TV music show. He had trained in London and performed all over the world. When he read about Lolita, he was deeply moved. Tweeted, talent needs no uniform. Salute to Lolita G. We must bring her to our show. That tweet went viral. Soon, reporters started calling. TV channels wanted to interview her. Some offered money, some wanted her to perform live. Paparazzi even came to the music school one Saturday, hoping to catch her on camera. Lolita was overwhelmed. She didn't know how to handle all this. She told Professor Nake, I don't want to be famous. I just want to play and teach. But Solanki sir personally called the school. He was kind and respectful. He said, you don't have to sing or dance. We just want to show the world that talent lives in every corner. Please come and play just one piece on our show. You can wear whatever you like. We'll take care of everything. Lolita thought deeply. She had never flown in a plane. She didn't like crowds or bright lights. But somewhere in her heart, she remembered how her father once said, music is not just for you. It's a gift meant to be shared. So, she said yes. Her neighbors were shocked. The local grocery shop man said, "R.A. Lolita Bai is going on TV." Her old school friend, who had once ignored her in the market, called to say sorry and wish her luck. When she arrived at the airport, wearing a simple beige sari and carrying an old handbag, the airline staff greeted her like a celebrity. She sat by the window, eyes wide with wonder, watching the clouds float by like white dreams at the TV studio. Makeup artists offered to give her a makeover. She politely refused. "I'll wear this," she said, pointing to her sari. "This is who I am." During rehearsal, she sat at a sleek black piano on the stage. The cameras, lights, and large audience made her heart beat fast. But when her fingers touched the keys, all fear disappeared. She played not for the cameras, not for the fame, but for the girl she once was, the one who practiced late at night while her mother cooked, the one who lost everything but never lost the melody. Inside, when she finished, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. Solanki sir had tears in his eyes. He walked up to her and touched her feet. "Ma'am," he said, "you've reminded us what real music is." That moment was recorded and broadcasted all over the country. Millions watched. People cried. Some remembered their forgotten hobbies. Others picked up old instruments. Schools and NGOs called her, asking her to visit, to inspire. Lolita didn't become rich. She didn't ask for money or a fancy life. She continued her work, her classes, and her music school hours, but the world now saw her differently. She was no longer invisible. One evening, after a long day, she sat by the window in her small room. The sky was orange. Birds flew back to their nests. A soft breeze touched her face. She closed her eyes and hummed an old tune her father used. To play, she smiled. Not because she was famous now, but because, after years of silence, the music had finally found its way home. After Lolita's performance on national television, her life changed in quiet, unexpected ways. She didn't suddenly move into a big house or wear expensive clothes. She didn't quit her maid jobs or start living like a celebrity. She didn't let the fame make her proud. Instead, she became even more humble, more silent, and more thoughtful. But people around her had changed. Now, wherever she went, people noticed her. Shopkeepers smiled and offered her vegetables at half price. Children called her TV Wally Didi. Strangers stopped her on the street and asked for a photo. And the homes where she worked, people treated her with more respect. Some even asked her opinion on things like music and education. This was all very new to Lolita. For most of her life, she had been invisible. Now, she was seen, and not for what job she did, but for who she was inside. But not everyone was happy about her sudden recognition. In one of the houses where she worked, the lady of the house, Mrs. Sharma, grew jealous. Before, she used to mock Lolita, pretending to ask her to play piano just to get a laugh from her friends. But now that Lolita had become known, Mrs. Sharma felt uncomfortable. One afternoon, Mrs. Sharma called Lolita to the living room. She crossed her arms and said coldly, "Don't forget, Lolita, just because you went on TV doesn't mean you are a star. You still work in my house. You still have to clean my toilets." Lolita stood quietly holding a mop. She didn't reply. She only nodded. Mrs. Sharma continued, "I hope all this fame doesn't go to your head. People like us are educated. You're just lucky." Lolita looked at her with soft eyes. She wasn't angry. She had seen this kind of bitterness before in women who had everything and still felt empty inside. Later that evening, as she sat by the window of her small room, she thought about how fame can change people. It's not always the one who becomes famous, but the ones around them. Some cheer for you. Others secretly wish you would fall. But Lolita didn't want to fight anyone. She only wanted to continue her music and keep teaching children. One day, she received a letter from a school in a small town 2 hours away. It was a government school with very few facilities. The principal had watched her TV performance and read about her story. He wrote, "Our children have never seen a piano. They have never heard real music. Will you come and play for them?" Lolita thought for a moment. She didn't have the money to travel often, but something inside her said yes. That Sunday, she boarded a local train with a bag containing her lunch, a bottle of water, and a small portable keyboard someone had gifted her. The train was crowded. People stood in the aisle, vendors passed, shouting about samosas and tea, and children sat on their parents' laps. Lolita found a seat near the window. As the train moved through fields and small towns, she watched the world go by and thought about her father. He had once said, "If your music can make even one person smile, it's worth everything." When she reached the school, children gathered around her curiously. Some had never seen a keyboard. The school building was old, the paint was peeling, and the windows had no glass. But the children's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Lolita didn't. Sit on a stage. She sat on a wooden bench and placed the keyboard on a desk. She said, "I'm not here to teach you rules. I'm here to share something magical." And then she played. She didn't play anything complicated. It's just a simple tune with a rhythm like falling rain and a melody like a mother's lullaby. The children sat silently, some with mouths open, some with heads swaying. A few girls started clapping slowly in rhythm. A boy smiled and said, "It feels like dreaming." After the song, Lolita spoke to them gently. She told them how she learned music without books, without a real teacher, and without money. She said, "If you love something with your whole heart, the world will come to help you slowly, but surely." The school principal came to her with folded hands. "You have done something no textbook could do," he said. "You've made our children believe they matter." That night, as she returned on the train, she felt peaceful, tired, but peaceful. A few weeks later, another invitation came. This time it was from a non-profit organization that helped women from poor backgrounds. They wanted Lolita to speak at their annual gathering. She wasn't sure at first. "What will I say?" she asked Professor Nake at the music school. He smiled and said, "Just tell your truth. That is enough."
The event
Was held in a community hall. Around 100 women sat on plastic chairs, many with babies in their arms, some with sadness in their eyes. Lolita stood on a small stage, holding a microphone with trembling hands. She looked at them and began, "I am not rich. I am not educated. I clean homes. I cook for others. I never went to music school. But I had a dream." The room was silent. Some women leaned forward, others wiped their eyes. She continued, "People laughed at me. They said I was too old, too poor, too simple. But I didn't listen. I played anyway. I played because music was the only place I felt free." She told them about the day she was mocked and how that mockery became her moment of truth. She spoke about Mira, the little girl who believed in her, and about the music school that gave her a chance. By the end, women stood up and clapped. One woman came to her crying. She said, "I used to dance, but after my husband died, I forgot how to even smile. Thank you for reminding me." Another said, "Can you teach us too, even if we don't have instruments?" Lolita said, "Music begins in your body. Your heartbeat is rhythm. Your breath is melody. You don't need an instrument. To start, you only need to listen." That day, she started a free weekly class for women in a local temple hall. She taught them clapping rhythms, breathing exercises, and how to make music with their voices. Some brought steel plates and spoons. Others brought old broken tablas. They laughed, cried, and sang together. For 1 hour a week, they forgot their pain. Lolita's life was now full, not of money, but of purpose. She was still a maid, still wore the same saris, still walked the same streets, but she carried herself with dignity, its grace, its quiet power. And then one afternoon, something happened that shook her world. She received a phone call from a man in her village. It was her younger brother. She hadn't heard from him in years. They had not spoken since she left the village after her husband's death. He said, "Didi, I saw you on TV. Everyone here is talking about you." Cried Lolita, felt tears rise in her throat. Her mother was still alive. All these years, she had believed she had no one left. "Come visit," he said. "Please." The next week, she packed a small bag and took a train back to her village. It had been nearly 20 years. When she arrived, children ran alongside, her shouting, TV Wally Dee TV Wally Dee. She smiled through tears. Her old house still stood smaller than she remembered, but full of memories. Her mother, now very old and thin, sat on the porch. When she saw Lolita, she stood up slowly and opened her arms. No words were spoken. They just held each other. That night, neighbors gathered to see her. Some apologized for judging her when she was younger. Some offered tea and sweets. The village schoolteacher asked her to visit the local school the next morning. Lolita sat under a tree, surrounded by village children. She didn't have her keyboard, but she clapped a rhythm and asked the children to repeat it. And she taught them a simple tune. They sang. They laughed. Birds chirped above them. It was a moment of pure joy. Before leaving the village, she sat with her mother and said, "Ma, I'm sorry I left without telling you everything." Her mother held her hand and replied, "You don't need to say sorry. You followed your music. I'm proud of you." On the train back to the city, Lolita sat with her eyes closed. Her past and present had finally met and embraced each other. When she returned, something inside her had shifted. She now knew she had come full circle, from a scared, broken widow to a woman who helped others find light in their own darkness. She didn't want a statue or a stage. She only wanted to keep doing what she had started, spreading music where no one expected it, because sometimes a single melody in a quiet corner can do what 1,000 speeches can heal. After Lolita's return from her village visit, her life felt richer than ever. It was not because of fame, awards, or money, but because she understood the true meaning of her journey. The music she had kept inside for so long was no longer just her secret. It belonged to everyone who needed it. Back in the city, Lolita continued her simple daily routines. She woke up early, made tea for herself, and packed her modest lunch in an old cloth. She still went to work as a maid in a few homes. She still wore her simple cotton saris, some with small tears carefully stitched. But something in her eyes had changed. It was a quiet confidence, a gentle warmth that made people smile when they looked at her. Her students at the music school awaited her every Saturday. They loved her because she was real. She didn't speak with big words or complicated lessons. She told stories instead, stories of her father, her struggles, and her small victories. She taught them to feel the music in their hearts before their fingers touched the keys. She told them, music is not only in notes, it is in every heartbeat. One day, a young student named Raul came to her with a problem. He was from a rich family but felt lost. His parents wanted him to be a doctor or engineer, but his passion was music. He didn't know how to tell them. Lolita listened carefully, her face softening with understanding. She said, "Raul, sometimes we need to be brave for the things we love. Follow your heart gently, and it will find its way." Raul smiled and said, "Didi, you are like a guide. You make everything simpler." Lolita laughed softly. She loved seeing the light return in her students' eyes. It reminded her of her own childhood, of the long evenings sitting beside her father, listening to his fingers dance on the old piano. Meanwhile, Lolita's story continued to spread beyond the city. Small newspapers and online magazines wanted to write about her. They called her the piano maid who touched millions. But Lolita was careful. She didn't want to become a celebrity. She wanted her music to speak, not her name. One morning, she received a letter from a famous international music festival. The organizers had heard about her and invited her to perform in a special event showcasing hidden talents from around the world. Lolita was surprised and nervous. She had never traveled abroad. The idea of playing on such a big stage was both exciting and frightening. She called Professor Nake, who smiled warmly. "Lolita G, this is your chance to show the world the power of music born from the heart. Don't worry about anything. We will help you prepare." With the support of friends, students, and the music school, Lolita began preparing for her journey. She practiced every day, choosing pieces that told her story, the simple melodies her father taught her, songs inspired by her village, and new tunes she created herself. On the day of departure, she stood at the airport wearing her favorite blue sari. Her small suitcase was packed carefully, with a notebook, a pair of sandals, and her cherished necklace, a gift from her mother. She looked around, feeling a mix of excitement and calm. This was not just a trip, it was a new chapter. When Lolita arrived at the festival, she was amazed by the grandeur. The stage was huge, with lights shining like stars. Musicians from many countries tuned their instruments and prepared to perform. Lolita felt a flutter in her stomach, but remembered her father's words. Play with your heart, not with your fear. When it was her turn, she walked slowly to the grand piano. The audience was silent. She sat down and closed her eyes. Fingers touched the keys, and the music flowed gently like a river moving through a quiet forest. The melody spoke of hope, pain, and beauty. It was simple but deep, a language that everyone could understand. After the last note faded, the crowd erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering and clapping. Tears were seen in many eyes. Lolita smiled shyly and bowed. During the festival, many people approached her. A famous violinist from Italy said, "Your music is like a story told without words. It touches the soul." A group of young musicians from Brazil invited her to collaborate on a project about music and healing. Lolita realized that her music was not only about notes and rhythm, but about connecting hearts across cultures and languages. She felt proud, but never forgot where she came from. When she returned home, she brought back more than souvenirs. She brought new ideas, new friendships, and a stronger belief in herself. Life was not easy. Sometimes money was tight. Sometimes people judged her for still working as a maid despite her talent. But Lolita didn't mind. She knew her worth was not in wealth or status, but in the lives she touched and the music she shared. One evening, she sat with Mira and the other students in a small room filled with laughter and music. They were planning a concert to raise money for children who could not afford music lessons. Lolita said, "Music is a gift. When we share it, it grows bigger and brighter." The concert was a beautiful success. Parents came, neighbors came, and even some of Lolita's old employers came to watch. The children played with joy, and Lolita's eyes shone with happiness. As years passed, Lolita's story inspired many. Schools started programs for underprivileged children. Non-profits invited her to speak. She became a symbol of hope that talent and passion could rise from anywhere, regardless of background. But for Lolita, the greatest reward was simple. It was the smile on a child's face when they learned a new song. It was the quiet moment, when a student told her, "Thank you, Didi, for believing in me." It was the feeling of sitting at a piano, fingers moving freely, the music filling the room like a warm embrace. Her life was proof that sometimes the most unlikely people hold the greatest gifts, and that kindness, patience, and love can transform. A simple woman forced to play piano into a beacon of hope and inspiration for the world.